The night was still, unnaturally still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if wary of what moved in the darkness. I had been reading by the fire, its orange glow casting restless shadows across the walls, when it came. A low, tremulous note drifted through the night air, so faint I thought it only the creak of the old house settling. But then it rose, piercing, aching, mournful beyond words. The sound seemed not of this world, yet it carried the weight of every funeral bell I had ever heard. My chest tightened. I stepped to the window, pushing aside the curtain with a hand that trembled. Fields beyond lay silvered beneath the moon, empty but for a thin mist clinging to the grass. And yet, the cry came again, higher now, its cadence lilting, like a lament sung by someone who had known the deceased all their life. I could not tell from where it came, over the bog, through the hedgerows, or from just beyond the garden wall. Only that it came for us. And with a third and final wail, cold understanding settled in my bones. Before the next dawn, a death would claim this house. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mythos Insights. As always, I'm your host, Christoph. Thank you for tuning in again. Now, when most people today hear the word Banshee, they picture a ghostly woman, an emaciated figure floating with unkempt hair and tattered clothes, often dressed in white. A vengeful spirit who died a violent death, often at the hands of men, cursed to stalk the mortal realm, either by the cruelty of her fate or by the sheer spite for her aggressor. The sorrow of her fate is said to spill outward from her, weighing on those around her, projected in an ear-piercing scream. That scream, that cry, they say, is so powerful that blood can trickle from eyes and ears, and it can even kill a person outright. In some tales, the scream heaps upon the victim all the sorrow and hatred the Banshee herself felt in her final moments, emotions too heavy for any mortal to bear. In these later tales, to cross the path of a Banshee, especially if you're a man, meant certain death. As a woman scorned, she did not differentiate between her killer and other men. All men were guilty and all men must pay. Hashtag feminist icon, hashtag girlboss. But are these really banshees? Or are they merely variations of something else entirely? Echoes of a much older figure whose voice once carried a very different meaning. What you probably known as a banshee are the images of Gothic fiction and modern horror films. The woman in white or wailing woman of countless ghost stories, given the Irish name of Banshee. But across the windswept hills and low stone walls of Ireland, there is, however, another figure feared and revered in equal measure, and that is the actual Banshee of older lore. She is not a phantom who stalks the living at random, nor an evil spirit per se that can be banished with prayers. She comes only with a purpose, and her voice is not a weapon, but it's a message. And she screens it so she makes sure that the message will be heard. The Banshee, the woman of the fairy mound, is set to stand at the threshold between our world and what lies beyond. Her mournful cry heralding the death of someone bound to a particular bloodline. Her appearance is not always seen, but her lament is supposedly always heard. Sometimes it is a low, soft keening, like the sobs of a grieving mother, and other times it is a scream that splits the night, raw and piercing, setting even the bravest hearts quaking, so filled with emotion. In the oldest stories of the Banshee, she is a guardian bound by ancient ties, attached to certain families of noble Gaelic descent. The sound of a wail might drift over the bog and heather the evening before a death, or in the same hour, even if the dying person lies many miles away. But what is she truly? A lingering remnant of pre-Christian mythology? A fairy who has taken on the mantle of the mourner? The cursed spirit of an ancient keening woman? Or a living tradition woven from the threads of grief, coincidence, and cultural memory? Tonight, we will sift through centuries of accounts, from medieval manuscripts to modern witness testimonies, and we will follow the Banshee's trail through Irish and Scottish folklore, examine the stories of those who have heard her voice, and explore the shadowy origins of her legend. Whether she is a mythic sentinel or an echo from the other world or a ravenous ghost, her cry remains one of the most chilling sounds in all of Celtic folklore. And for those who claim to have heard it, one truth stands above all others. It is a sound you'll never forget. Now, before we begin, a small note. Many of the names and terms we'll encounter tonight come from Irish Gaelic and Old Scots. They are beautiful languages, I'll grant them that, but like the people who speak them, they are not exactly forgiving to outsiders. I'll be using pronunciation guides and phonetic spellings to get as close as I can to the actual pronunciation. I'll also put the original spelling on the screen so you can actually see what word salad I'm up against sometimes. Trust me, if you think that French has a lot of superfluous letters, Gaelic is much, much worse. Still, if my tongue slips here and there, take it in good humor. The Banshee may cry in sorrow at my mistakes, but I promise that every attempt is made with due respect. Now, in the Gaelic tongue, she is Banshee, pronounced roughly the same Banshee, literally woman of the fairy mound. The fairy mound refers to the Shee, which are ancient earthen barrows or hollow hills scattered across the Irish landscape. In early tradition, these were not simply burial places, but believed to be gateways to the other world, inhabited by the Shee, the fairy folk of Irish and Scottish lore. The Shee themselves are said to be the transformed remnants of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the semi-divine race who, according to the Liber Gala Éireann, the book of the taking of Ireland, once ruled the island. They arrived, so the stories tell, in a mist or on dark clouds, bringing with them 4 sacred treasures: the stone of Fal, which proclaimed the rightful king of Ireland; the spear of Lug, which never missed its target; the sword of Nada, from which no one could escape; and the Dagda's cauldron, which left no one unsatisfied. Now, when the Tuatha Dé Danann were defeated by the mortal Milesians, they did not vanish. Instead, they withdrew into the hollow hills of Ireland, becoming the Shee, still powerful beings who could grant fortune, calamity, or warnings to those they favored or those who crossed them. The mounds themselves became sacred thresholds, places where the human world and the other world of the Shee touched. It is from this otherworldly host that the Banshee is believed to descend. In older stories, she's not an aimless ghost, but a specialized messenger within the Shee hierarchy, bound to a human family whose bloodline stretches back to Ireland's early chieftains, perhaps even to the Tuatha themselves. Folklore often speaks of her attachment to ancient Irish families, particularly those with O or Mac surnames and noble ancestry. Later, stories name certain lines specifically, such as O'Grady, O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Connor, and Kavanagh. One of these is not like the others, though local belief varies, with some claiming her loyalty follows bloodline over social station. So it doesn't matter if you're a noble or an important chieftain line, no, it's just your line all the way through. So in function, she is a harbinger, a messenger between worlds whose sole purpose is to forewarn the family of an impending death. In earlier centuries, such warnings may have been understood as a mercy, a chance to gather kin around, settle affairs, or prepare for rites of passing. In some monster traditions, the most famed among the Banshee kind is Cleona, a goddess in earlier myth and often called the Queen of the Banshees. Cleona rules over Tir Tanger, the land of promise, an otherworld realm of beauty and abundance. She is said to be the most beautiful woman in the world, and she is always accompanied by 3 birds whose songs can heal any illness. Yet her stories are tinged with tragedy. In one, she falls in love with a mortal man and leaves the other world to be with him, only to drown when lulled to sleep by fairy music as a great wave claims her. Her dominion over death and her connection to both love and loss may explain why she became associated with the Banshee's mournful duty. In parts of Cork and the southern coast, Cleona is even said to serve as the personal Banshee to certain noble families, and her lament is a mingling of grief and gives regal authority to those bloodlines. Now, what you have to know about the Banshee is that she doesn't have a description that aligns completely. In one parish, the Banshee might be remembered as a tall, radiant woman in white with hair like spun silver. In another, as a stooped crone, her eyes red and swollen from centuries of weeping. In the Scottish, Bennia, or washerwoman, scrubbing the blood from garments that will soon be worn by the dead, is also considered a form of Banshee, or at least a close cousin, or a regional variant of the same Banshee belief. Yet, in all versions, her presence carries the same meaning. The keening, the tradition, the actions are for someone in your household who is going to die. And when you notice the message, it is already too late to change what she has come to foretell. The Banshee is not bound to one era. Her lament threads through centuries, moving from the pages of medieval annals to the memories of those still living today. One of the earliest written mentions of a supernatural death omen in Irish history appears in the Caref Thirlve, the Triumphs of Thirlve. This is no folk tale collection, but a 14th century chronicle of the bloody dynastic wars of Thomond, fought between rival branches of the powerful O'Brien clan. It is part battlefield record and part political manifesto, intended to cement the legitimacy of Thirlve's claim to power. Thirlve's full name is Thirlve O'Brien, so O'Brien is a derivative of that. Among its accounts of troop movements, skirmishes, victories, the chronicler also describes the wail of a banshee. Though not yet fully fixed in the modern form Banshee, her keening, he writes, still rose over the night before the death of a noble chieftain in the battle later. It is described that her wail carried as the wind through reeds. The event here is noted not as a rumor, but as matter of fact. It just happened, and it is set alongside the naming of different commanders in the battle and the tallying of casualties afterward. So, we can conclude that in medieval Irish culture, such a detail was not readily dismissed as superstitions. Omens, prophetic dreams, and the encounters with the Ishi were seen as meaningful parts of political life, especially for a ruling dynasty claiming descent from legendary ancestors. Again, this is also why we should take it with a grain of salt, because these stories might be used to claim more legitimacy. The chronicler's inclusion of the fairy woman's wail served two purposes. First, as a sign that the chieftain's death was marked by the other world, lending it weight and inevitability, and second as an acknowledgement that certain noble lines were under the watch of these ancestral spirits. To a 14th century Irish audience, this was neither fantasy nor filler, it was part of the factual and spiritual record of the war, a sign that their war and their cause was just and backed by the Ishi. From the 17th century comes the account of one Lady Anne Fanshawe, an English gentlewoman of sharp education and precise habits. In 1642, while travelling in Ireland with her husband, the diplomat Sir Richard Fanshawe, Dick to his friends, she lodged with a family believed to have been the O'Briens, one of the, like I said earlier, noble Gaelic lines bound by tradition to the Banshee's watch. Lady Fanshawe recorded in her memoirs that she woke in the early hours to find a woman standing outside her bedroom window, despite the room and her window being on an upper floor. The figure's hair was long, loose, and a deep copper red. Her gown was white and her eyes were swollen and red from weeping. In the stillness of the night, the woman let out a single piercing cry that seemed to freeze the blood in Lady Fanshawe's veins, and then the figure vanished into the night air. By morning, news came that the master of the house had died suddenly during the night. No cause was recorded, but other members of the household, including at least one servant, claimed to have heard the same unearthly cry during the night. Lady Fanshawe's memoirs, intended only for her family and written decades later, treat the event not as folklore but as a part of the household's history. She offers no explanation, no moral, no message, no intended narrative, only the plain sequence of what she claims she witnessed. It is this plainness of the record and the corroboration of others that has preserved her account as one of the most enduring, high-born encounters with the Banshee to this date. In 1801 came the death of Robert Cunningham, Bob to his friends, the first Baron Rossmore, a soldier, politician, and member of the Irish aristocracy. According to the memoirs of Sir Jonah Barrington, the end was heralded by a strange voice in the night. In the early hours of August 6th, members of the Rossmore household were jolted awake by the sound of a woman calling the Baron's name, not once, but 3 times. 3 times in tones both clear and mournful. The voice was heard by more than one person, each of whom swore it was close at hand, though no living source could be found inside or outside the house. Rossmore, who admittedly had been unwell but was not thought to be in immediate danger, died suddenly not long after. Sir Jonah Barrington, aware that such tales invite skepticism, stressed in his account that the witnesses were all of sound mind and unimpeachable truth, and he framed the voice as the call of a banshee, noting that the Rossmore family, for all their Anglo-Irish stature, still traced part of their bloodline to ancient Gaelic stock. For later folklorists, the case became a keystone example of the banshee's reach across class lines, a reminder that her cry was said to come for nobleman and villager alike. Even more recently, an entry in the Irish Folklore Commission's Schools Collection preserves a banshee story from County Clare in the late 1930s. A local woman told of sitting awake on a still autumn night when she heard 3 cries outside her home. The first was low and sighing. The second rose sharply in tone, and the third lingered in the air like a note of unbearable grief. The sound seemed to drift from the direction of the old ring fort on the edge of her family's land, a place long whispered about as a dwelling of the Ishi. She had no reason to expect ill news, yet before morning her brother, away working in Limerick, was dead. Such accounts, preserved in the school's collection, are among the last living expressions of a belief that had survived into the 20th century almost unchanged from its medieval form. The setting, the threefold cry, the link to an ancient mound, all echo the core elements of mythical Banshee lore that have threaded through Irish storytelling for centuries. In each case, the pattern repeats. It is night, it is a misty day. The wail is heard, often by more than one witness. It's not really certain where the sound comes from, but it is certain that it carries a distinctly human sorrow, and within hours or days, the predicted death occurs. And while most testimonies speak of a single voice in the night, there are tales in Irish tradition that there are rare occasions when more than one banshee appears, or at least is heard. And when this happens, their voices do not clash or it's like chaos, but they blend into a chorus of laments, weaving in and out of one another, sometimes described as even more unbearably beautiful, sometimes enough to drive a listener to their knees in both beauty and sorrow. Such a phenomena, folklore says at least, is reserved for the passing of someone of exceptional stature, a saint, a poet of rare genius, or a leader of great renown. It is as though the other world itself sends an honor guard to mark that soul's departure. The 18th century historian Charles O'Connor noted local accounts in which 3 banshees were heard wailing together on the night before the death of an esteemed chieftain. In another tale from the oral tradition of County Kerry, an elderly witness claimed to have heard 7 voices together, rising over the wind before the burial of a beloved parish priest. In both cases, the singers were unseen, and the sound vanished just as suddenly as it had begun. Even in these stories, the banshees are not cast as vengeful spirits or bringers of death. Their appearance, whether in solitude or in a rare solemn company, is an act of ceremony, an announcement that one of the living is about to cross into the realm they guard. The cry is not the way the person dies, it is simply stating they are going to die. And even when the banshee is not seen itself, the voice alone is enough to stop men in their tracks. Descriptions of the cry vary. Sometimes it's soft and low, crying, sobbing. Other times it's a high-pitched, almost unbearable shriek. But all agree it is steeped in grief, and that it is unlike any earthly voice, despite all the human emotion put into it. In these stories, the banshee does not linger after her task is done. The wail fades, the air grows still, and life moves on. Well, for most people anyway, there's always the one the banshee wailed about who's not going to be able to finish their bucket lists. When the subject is as elusive as the banshee, evidence is rarely physical in the traditional sense. There are no artifacts preserved in museums, no skeletal remains, no trace materials gathered and analyzed in laboratories. I mean, what are you going to analyze? Sound? Well, you can, but not in this case. I mean, no one recorded the cry of a banshee before. But what we have instead is a body of consistency, recurrent elements across centuries of testimony that, when examined closely, reveal distinct patterns. Of course, first and foremost, the most commonly reported detail is the sound of the wail itself. You hear a banshee most of the time without seeing them, and the cry is the one thing that defines a banshee. Witnesses often describe it as starting low and mournful, and then building to a high, piercing cry before fading away again. In some accounts, the sound is repeated 3 times, each wail louder than the last, while others report a sustained keening that rises and falls like a dirge. The timbre of the voice is frequently described as undeniably human, yet impossible to attribute to any human voice, however that works. The distance is often said to shift as one listens. One moment it's close, the next it's far away, regardless of wind or terrain or weather conditions. Often said to seem even both near and far as one listens, a quality witnesses struggle to place in a surrounding. As for the effect on witnesses, many accounts speak of when you hear it that your hair stands on end, you get sudden chills, and you feel a tightening in the chest, as if that sound provokes a very visceral and direct reaction on the listener. Though far rarer than auditory encounters, sightings of the Banshee do occur, and their commonalities are striking, with a bit of a caveat. Now, most of the time, the hair color of a Banshee is red and silver gray, but sometimes it's also said to have been pitch black. The eyes are mostly said to be red and swollen as if from constant weeping. I mean, everyone who's had a good cry knows that your eyes the next morning are like... And the size of the Banshee varies. Some say she is of normal human height, and others claim she is no taller than a child, but with perfect human adult proportions. Now, how she looks is varying, and that is the nuance I was talking about earlier. The Banshee is most often depicted in one of three guises. And stop me if you heard this one before. The first one is a beautiful young woman, often dressed in white or silver gray. The second form is that of a matronly figure of middle age, a face marked with sorrow. And the third form is that of an aged crone, stooped and with long tangled hair. Now, some of you might already guess where I'm going with this. And though presented in folklore as three distinct forms, the maiden, the mother, and the crone, these guises also invite comparison with another triple-aspected figure of Irish mythology, and that is most notably the Morrigan, also known as the Phantom Queen, often described as a triad of goddesses, be it Morrigan, Bath, and Marker. She is likewise associated with prophecy, death, and transformation. Oh boy. In the Torn Bo Cuolnya, let's do that again. In the Torn Bo Cuolnya, and related sagas, she appears both as a radiant woman and as an aged hag, or else as a crow crying doom on the battlefield. And I know enough women who would identify themselves more with a doom crow than with either a radiant woman or an old hag, so this checks out. The parallel between the Banshee and the Morrigan is kind of striking. The Banshee's shifting forms mirror the stages of life embodied by the Morrigan and her sisters. Both figures are not merely witnesses to death, but heralds of fate. One, the Morrigan, shrieks it above armies, and the other, the Banshee, laments it at the threshold of a home. To me, it's not possible to say with certainty whether Banshee lore directly descends from memories of the Morrigan, or whether the similarity is the result of shared symbolic structures. After all, what scholars call the triple goddess motif is widespread across many Indo-European traditions. In the case of Ireland, however, the Banshee's title as Banshee, woman of the fairy mount, provides a more clear link to the she-mounds where the Tuatha De Danann, including the Morrigan, were said to dwell after their withdrawal from the mortal world. So it is possible that they do share a connection. Thus, when folklore describes a Banshee as alternately youthful, maternal, and ancient, it may preserve echoes of the older Phantom Queen, the Morrigan, diminished from big goddess to just an omen, but still marking the boundary between the mortal world and the other world, between the living and the dead. Now, patterns also emerge in the geography and timing of reported encounters. Often a cry is linked to an ancient ring fort, dolmens and burial mounds, places which are, historically and mythically, associated in Irish tradition with the Ishi. Most of the cries happen almost always at night, with many accounts placing them more specifically between twilight and midnight. In addition, a notable number of reports occur in still, windless conditions, where natural explanations for sound travel are least likely. While solitary encounters make up the majority of cases, a significant number involve two or more witnesses. In these, details do tend to align closely, particularly in descriptions of the sound's emotional quality, in its shifting direction and time when it happened. And in the overwhelming majority of accounts, the death foretold by the wail occurs within 24 hours, though some note a gap of up to 3 days. The identity of the deceased often matches the traditional family attachment attributed to the Banshee in that region. Again, Banshees were connected to specific bloodlines. If she cried, one of those lineages would die. Now, from an empirical standpoint, none of these traits can be proven in any controlled environment. Yet the recurrence of specific auditory and visual elements across widely separated times and places suggests that the Banshee is more than just an isolated fancy. It is a phenomenon deeply imprinted in the cultural memory, one that witnesses describe with a startling degree of agreement. The Banshee's image, the wailing woman bound to an ancient bloodline, perhaps sprung from the Tuatha De Danann, or a goddess like Cleona, and it is rich with myth and tradition. In the centuries-old accounts, a presence feels inevitable, unquestionable, as much a part of life and death in Ireland as the land itself. But folklore, however enduring, is rarely one thing alone. It is a tapestry woven from belief, history, and the human tendency to find meaning in what we can't explain. The Banshee may be a supernatural herald, a remnant of Ireland's goddesses, a cultural tradition reshaped by time, or something more mundane, yet no less powerful in its hold on the imagination. What follows are leading theories, speculations, explanations, each offering a different lens through which to see the Banshee, and perhaps to understand why, for over 1,000 years, her cry has never been forgotten in Ireland. In the deepest layers of Irish tradition, the Banshee's role is strikingly similar to that of divine messengers found across the world's mythologies. In Christian belief, angels bear messages from God to humankind, often warnings or proclamations of events that cannot be altered. In Greek mythology, Hermes moved between Olympus, the mortal realm, and the underworld, carrying the will of the gods with him. In Norse legend, the Valkyries ride to the battlefield from Valhalla to choose the slain and escort them back to Valhalla, not acting from personal will, but executing a higher order's command, be that of Odin. The Banshee may actually belong to this same archetype. In the old Gaelic worldview, she is, again, Banshee, a woman of the fairy mound, and thus a member of the Ishi, the people of the fairy mounds, believed to be the remnants of the Tuatha De Danann, Ireland's ancient gods. These beings, the Ishi, are not ghosts in the general sense. They are denizens of the other world, a parallel realm whose rules and purposes are beyond mortal comprehension. They are basically other living creatures. When the Banshee keens, she may not be acting from her own will at all. Her lament could be the official proclamation of the other world, a message bound by laws older than any human kingdom. In this interpretation, she is a herald, delivering an immutable truth. A death is coming. No bargaining or prayer can alter it, just as no mortal could turn away an angel of God or a Valkyrie from Valhalla. This divine herald perspective also reframes the Banshee's perceived attachment to certain families. Rather than being a sentimental mourner, she may serve as a psychopomp, a guide and witness to the passing of those within her charge, bound not by affection or chance but by an ancient covenant. She does not cause the death, she announces, but she ensures that the family receives the message.
It's about sending a message,
as she has done for generations. In such a view, her nature is neither wholly benevolent nor malevolent, but simply inevitable.
I am inevitable.
She is the voice of a higher law, one that passes through human lives as the wind passes over the hills. It is felt, it is heard, but you can't answer to it, you can't change it. The idea of the Banshee as a divine or semi-divine messenger draws directly from the mythic roots we explored earlier. But while that interpretation exalts her as something beyond human comprehension, a fake creature, the next theory brings her firmly back into the realm of the living, to a time when her cry may have been not supernatural at all, but the very real voice of a woman standing among mourners. Before the Banshee was a figure of dread, she may have been a figure of honor. In pre-Christian Ireland, death was accompanied by the ancient practice of kine, ritual mourning through song. And that's also where we get the word keening from, after all. Professional keeners, almost always women, were hired to perform elaborate laments at wakes and funerals. These were not simple cries of grief, like just go to a funeral, start to cry and "job's done," but structured performances combining poetry, praise and personal remembrance, designed both to honor the dead and to guide their soul to the other world. Now, in the tradition of keening, we face a classic folkloric question. Did the Banshee myth inspire the tradition of keening, or did the tradition of keening give rise to the Banshee myth? Again, we cannot say for certain, it's a chicken and egg situation. It is possible that early keeners consciously imitated what they believed to be the mournful cries of spirits, keeping the legend alive in human form. Or perhaps the presence of keening women in real funerals became the seed from which the supernatural Banshee would grow, as stories exaggerated their power and persistence and clairvoyance beyond mortal limits. What is clear is that in this early form, this cry was not feared. Among pagan Irish communities, hearing the lament of an unseen mourner on the eve of a death could be interpreted as a sign that the departed was receiving due honors, even from the other world itself, that their time in the mortal realm was done and they were welcomed into the afterlife. The Banshee or the keener was not a monster but a participant in the sacred tradition from life to death. But everything changed when Christianity attacked. The transformation came with the Christianization of Ireland. From the medieval period onward, the Catholic Church sought to regulate and control funeral rites, suppressing elements it considered pagan survivals. Keening drew particular suspicion. The laments often contained references to pre-Christian deities, mythic heroes, and the fairy folk. Some even slipped into satire or improvised social commentary, all of which lay outside the church control. And we all know, if an authority can't control a narrative, they'd rather stop the narrative completely. By the 17th century, ecclesiastical authorities were formally condemning professional keening, banning its more elaborate and improvised forms, and portraying it as a dangerous heathen remnant. This shift gradually changed the way people interpreted unbidden cries in the night. Where once an unexplained lament might have been seen as a gesture of compassion from the unseen world, now it was easier to imagine it as a restless spirit or a demonic omen. The Church's broad teaching that all fairy beings were at best deceivers and at worst agents of hell gave the Banshee's wail a darker edge in the people's consciousness. Thus, the Banshee's role shifted from guardian mourner to death's herald. She had always been a messenger, but where that message had once been of honor, as your passing will be marked and you are welcome, it now became a warning to fear. Death is coming and nothing can stop it. If this theory is true, then the Banshee's wail was once a human act accompanied by myth, later reshaped in something spectral by centuries of changing beliefs. But what if that transformation went further, warping her entirely into something she was never meant to be? And that's where the next misunderstanding begins. The Banshee is nothing more than a type of ghost. Now, some of you are probably thinking, Christoph, hold up a second. I've clicked on this video because I wanted to hear about ghosts. I've heard very little of ghosts in this episode. Is it the Banshee a spirit, a spectre who can kill with her piercing scream? Well, yes and no. Like I said in the beginning, modern popular culture has blurred the lines between the Banshee of Gaelic tradition and the woman in white ghost type common to European folklore. The result is that many people today assume that a Banshee is simply a vengeful female spirit, usually the restless ghost of a woman wronged in life who wanders the night screaming in anger or sorrow. This archetype of the woman scorned exists in dozens of cultures. In English-speaking ghost lore, she is often a pale figure in a white gown who haunts the scene of a betrayal or murder. In Spain and Latin America, La Llorona, the weeping woman, wanders near water, mourning the children she drowned by drowning even more children. Not actively solving your problem there. In Slavic tradition, the Rusalki are the spirits of drowned maidens who lure men to watery deaths. And even in Ireland, the trope exists in separate ghost stories. Local legends speak of women who died violently, perhaps in childbirth, perhaps abandoned by a lover, who linger in the mortal world unable to rest. These ghosts, these women in white, are tied to places and personal stories. They are, by their nature, individuals. They were each their own person with a story, a life, and a death, each with a specific tragedy, a location they haunt, and often a desire for revenge or justice. They are bound to the mortal realm because of unfinished business, cursed to relive their grief or rage for eternity. They may appear and vanish at random, but their haunting is personal. The Banshee is not this. She is not an individual ghost. She has no grave, no birthplace, and no unfinished business. She does not seek revenge for a wrong done to her. She does not linger to terrify the living for sport or satisfaction. She is not tied to a single patch of ground, but to a family line. Her appearance is random, it is purposeful, and it is the same purpose every time: to herald the death of someone in a particular bloodline. Where the woman in white is often malevolent, the Banshee is rarely, if ever, harmful. Her wail is not meant to curse, it is a message. And while it is a terrible message, one you rather not get, it is not necessarily a hostile one. Again, although when someone calls you up in the middle of the night saying you'll die in a few hours, that might feel rather hostile. In many older accounts, the Banshee appears to grieve together with the family, sharing their sorrow rather than simply causing it. A ghost mostly causes sorrow. There is another crucial difference. In the older Gaelic worldview, like I said many times, the Banshee was not even considered a ghost at all, but a fey being, part of the Ishi, the fairy folk whose dwellings lie within the ancient mounds and hills. Her origin is mythic, tied to Tuatha De Danann and the otherworld. In this sense, she's closer to an actual living being or even a cryptid than to the spirit of a mortal woman. So where did the confusion and this mix-up come from? Well, part of it is the natural blending of folk traditions over time. Stories of vengeful women and tragic hauntings are easily interchanged in the retelling, especially when both involve nighttime wails. Another cause is the influence of Victorian Romanticism and Gothic fiction, which reshaped Celtic folklore into ghostly tales for a broader audience. In these retellings, the Banshee was recast as just another lonely spectre stripped of a fey heritage and reduced to a dramatic cursed figure in white. By the 19th and 20th centuries, stage plays, penny dreadfuls, and later films further cemented the image of the Banshee as a wandering ghost, an image which persists in much of modern media. The supernatural family herald became just another spooky woman in a gown who screams at you. And that's the thing, modern fiction also sometimes arms the Banshee with a power she never possessed in older lore: the ability to kill with her scream. This deadly wail motif is a late addition, likely borrowed from horror traditions and ghost stories where supernatural beings actively harm their victims. In authentic Irish and Scottish belief, the Banshee's cry does not end alive. It foretells the end that is already set in motion. In modern fiction, the scream actually is so loud that it bursts veins, it can melt your brain, your eyes pop, and everything is super great. And while it's perfectly fine if you enjoy these more modern retellings of the Banshee, I mean, I like these just as well, and that is what first got me interested in Banshees, they are not the historical Banshee, and I wanted to give more of a nuance to it, so you know that behind the woman screams at you, people's brains melt, there is more than just that. However, there is a rational path by which the misconception of the killing scream could have seemed true. A sudden piercing cry, especially when heard in solitude and steeped in the weight of an ill omen, can trigger a severe psychological reaction. A startle response, adrenaline surge, and panic can strain the heart. In rare cases, a listener already in fragile health might suffer a heart attack or another acute medical event. The death in such cases would be grimly ironic. It's not the Banshee claiming a victim, but the fear of her doing so. But if we return to the oldest sources, the distinction between ghosts and Banshee is clear. The woman in white, the wailing woman, is a person, or rather, the spirit of a person, bound by her own tragedy. The Banshee is not a person. She is a being of the other world, timeless, attached not to events in her own life, but to the destinies of others. She is not the ghost of a woman who died badly. She is something much older and stranger, mourner, oracle, entirely beyond human origin. The woman in white ghost and the Banshee may share a few visual cues, but their purpose and origins are worlds apart. Still, this confusion reminds us that some encounters might have nothing to do with myth at all, and everything to do with the mind's tendency to turn the strange into the supernatural. Not every explanation for the Banshee involves gods, fair folk, or ancient mourning rites. For some folklorists and researchers, the wail belongs to not a supernatural herald, but to the landscape, the wildlife, and the human mind itself. Ireland and Scotland, with their open moors, rugged coastlines, and still windless nights, can produce uncanny sounds. In such environments, even ordinary noises, amplified by valleys, carried by mists, or distorted by temperature shifts, can sound eerily human. Animals are the most common natural suspects. The scream of a vixen in mating season, the territorial cry of a barn owl, or the call of certain seabirds can all produce long, wavering notes that, in the dead of night, might easily be mistaken for a lament. Red foxes, in particular, emit a high-pitched, almost hysterical shriek that many first-time hearers describe as a woman or a child screaming.
What the fuck, say?
When heard from an unseen source with no movement in sight, such cries can be deeply unsettling. And I speak from personal experience, it is a horrible sound to hear. Adding to that, there is the matter of auditory pareidolia, our tendency to interpret ambiguous sounds as familiar ones, especially voices. Humans evolved with a strong instinct to recognize patterns, and that instinct gave us an advantage. You're likely most familiar with visual pareidolia, when we see images in seemingly random shapes, a face in the cloud, or a figure in the shadows at the corner of your eye. This is an ancient survival reflex, because it is better to imagine a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes and be wrong than to overlook the predator entirely and die. The same principle applies to sound. In moments of stress, grief, or fear, the brain is primed to find meaning in random noise. A rustle, a cry of a fox, or the wind over stone can be shaped into a human-like voice. And if a family is already expecting death because a relative is gravely ill, any strange sound in the night may be interpreted as the Banshee's keening, especially in a culture where her cry is part of a collective memory. Weather conditions can also heighten the effect. In certain atmospheric states, particularly during temperature inversions, don't ask, I'm not a weather wizard, sound can travel unusually far or shift in apparent direction. A dog barking miles away or a wail from an animal in the distance might seem to come from just outside one's own window. In folklore, this shifting direction is a classic trait of the Banshee's cry, which is said to sound close one moment and very far the next. Now, to go even further than pareidolia into the psychological side, we have hypnagogic hallucinations. Vivid sensory experiences in the moments between wakefulness and sleep, and they could also account for some encounters. Many historical accounts, including famous ones like the one from Lady Fanshawe, occur when witnesses were in bed at night and may have been drifting in and out of sleep. In that fragile state, sounds and visions can feel startlingly real even when they originate completely in the mind. Think about our old pal, sleep paralysis for example, and the feeling it gives the sufferer that there is a presence with them in the room. If you would go back to Lady Fanshawe's encounter when she saw someone standing outside her bedroom window, you could chalk it up completely to a hypnagogic hallucination or sleep paralysis. However, all of these explanations have their limits. They do not fully account for cases where the cry is heard by multiple witnesses in clear waking states, or in perfectly still weather, and is followed sometimes within hours by the death of someone seemingly in perfect health, closely connected to the hearers. In such instances, skeptics must either write it off as a series of coincidences or suggest that the witnesses unconsciously primed themselves to hear the same thing. It is also worth noting that in many communities, especially rural ones, natural explanations were known. Rural Irish and Scottish folk were intimately familiar with the sounds of foxes, owls, and the wind. For them, if they heard a banshee's cry, it was something else, something odder with a distinctly human grief that they couldn't ascribe to an animal they were familiar with. So while the skeptical viewpoint offers plausible mechanisms, wildlife, weather psychology, for perhaps 90% of all Banshee encounters, I would even say 99%, it often fails to capture the cultural context in which the Banshee is recognized. For those who believe, the difference is as plain as hearing a neighbor's voice in the dark. There is simply no mistaking it for anything else. This brings us to the next question. Why does the Banshee endure at all in modern memory, long after belief in fairies has waned? I believe the answer lies in her cultural role and in what she means to the people who tell her story. Even for those who do not believe in fairies, the Banshee occupies a space in Irish and Scottish consciousness that is hard to dislodge. She is more than a supernatural figure. She's a cultural one, a living thread in a tapestry of identity that stretches back over 1,000 years. To speak of the Banshee is to speak of the Gaelic world, of a time before English rule, before the dominance of the Catholic Church, when families were known by their ancient names and their lands were marked by ring forts and cairns rather than parish boundaries. Her very name, Banshee, is still in the Irish tongue, and her loyalties, at least in the old stories, are to families of obvious Gaelic descent. In this way, the Banshee is also a quiet act of cultural preservation. To keep her story alive is to keep alive part of the language, the family histories, and the worldview from which she comes. This is perhaps why, even in the modern retellings, her attachment is to the O and Mac families, and why her haunts are the burial mounds of the Ishi rather than churchyards. She represents a link to the old order, one unbroken by conquest or conversion by state and church. In times when Gaelic culture was suppressed by English political control, by the erosion of language, or by the church's dismissal of older beliefs, figures like the Banshee became all the more important. They were theirs, not important saints or English ghosts. Her wail was a reminder that the people of the land had their own ways of marking death, their own guardians and their own messengers from the other world. And this may also explain her remarkable survival into the modern era. Across Europe, other supernatural death omens, the Dutch revered, the German Nachtseher, the Norse Draugr, have largely faded from living tradition, preserved only in folklorists' notebooks. But the Banshee endures, not merely as a general ghost story, but also as an emblem of cultural resilience. Where other omens vanished with industrialization, urbanization, and the loss of oral tradition, she adapted. Her role shifted just enough to remain relevant, while still rooted in the same Gaelic soil. Even now, to hear of her is to be reminded that you are part of a longer story, one in which the living and the dead, the mortal and the otherworldly, are bound together by blood, land, and memory. Now, even this cultural role for Ireland and Scotland is only one part of the whole. The Banshee's legend persists because she's all of these things at once. She's myth and memory, goddess and ghost, warning and comfort. Which brings us to her hybrid legacy. Perhaps the Banshee endures simply because she inhabits many identities at once. She's an Ishi envoy, she's a divine remnant, shadow of the Keening woman tradition, she's the unplaceable voice in the dark. She belongs to both the sacred and the everyday, to the pagan past and history of Ireland and the Christian present, to the bog's stillness, to the storm's edge. Poetry. Even her role as a watered-down version of herself in modern horror serves to keep her in the cultural eye just for a bit longer. And whether she's truly heard or simply remembered, her cry remains one of the most potent sounds in Irish cultural memory. It is a bridge between myth and mortal life, between what is known and what cannot be known. For more than 1,000 years, the Banshee's voice is carried across the fields and glens of Ireland and Scotland, sometimes as a whisper on the wind, sometimes as a scream that stills the heart. Her form has shifted with the centuries. Goddess, fairy woman, keening spirit, cultural memory. Yet, her essence remains unchanged. She is not a restless ghost nor a vengeful phantom. She is the herald, the one who comes to announce what no mortal can prevent. We now understand her place in the weave of Celtic tradition. She's part divine messenger, part remnant of a sacred mourning rite, part embodiment of an unbroken Gaelic identity. She is shaped as much by history, religion, and the politics as by the myths that preceded them. And while natural sounds, grief, and coincidence may explain some encounters, they cannot erase the sheer persistence of her image in the cultural memory. A cry is not an invitation to fear so much as a reminder, a voice that tells us death is approaching and that it is worth pausing to acknowledge it. Memento mori. To hear her is to stand for a moment at the edge of two worlds, aware of how thin the line between them truly is. No charm has ever turned her away. She comes when she must, to the families she serves in her own time. And when she leaves, only silence remains, save for the memory of a cry that lingers in the bones. So when the night lies still, when the wind is absent, and a voice, low, mournful or piercing, rises from the darkness, it is not curiosity that takes hold. It is recognition. The question is no longer what she is. It is only, for whom does she weep tonight? Thank you everyone who made it this far into the video. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you really like that dive into the folkloric background of the Banshee, please leave a like, leave a comment, share your thoughts. I'm always interested to hear what you guys think about the content that I make and about these creatures in themselves. Personally, I'm a big fan of the more modern retelling that the Banshee is a ghost, but I am deeply interested about the cultural background, and I could probably have made a much longer video about it. But this video is probably already more than an hour long, so I'm gonna cut it short there. The thing is that I do feel that with these videos, I am more and more getting into, hey, we have a ghost like the Banshee or the Wendigo, and while we have the modern version of that creature, there is so much more in the folklore and the myths behind the monster. Before it became popular, there is a cultural weight to all these creatures. And I feel like now that I'm doing these scripts more often and I do these videos more often, that I'm enjoying that part of the video a lot. I'm not going to say a lot more, but just a lot. And I do think that this is probably where the channel is growing towards, giving like historical and cultural backgrounds to monsters that we know from day to day, to actually explain why it is that some monsters resonate with us so much in today's day and age, so in modern times. Anyway, if you liked that deep dive into the history of the Banshee, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below what your belief is, what you think about the Banshee, what you like about it, what you dislike about it. If there's points that I made that you disagree with or you do agree with, please let me know. And yeah, that's it for today. Hope you all have a very good... That's it for today. Thank you for watching. I'm really bad at doing exits. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all of you. This was Mythos Insights. I'm your host, Christoph, and I will see you in the next one. In the meantime, take heed of any cries you might hear at night. Be wary of the shadows.